y'all. I'm Dr. Reagan, and welcome back to CRxOWN Talks, your weekly dose of health and healing in Black communities. And in 15 minutes or so, we clear up myths about Black health and break down the healthcare questions you wish you'd asked and the ish they should have told you. So this week, we're continuing our series on back to school. And a lot of people don't understand this, but as our kids get ready to go back to school, we really have to think about one major thing that's hitting our communities hard, and that's human trafficking. So today, I have my friend and classmate with me to discuss human trafficking. Welcome to Coasy Hale. She's the COO of Freed Life by Restore Core. It's on her thing. And she'll tell us a little bit more about what it is and what she does in a minute. So welcome, Coasy.
Hi, thank you for having me, Reagan.
So let's jump straight in. What's one myth about human trafficking you wish people would stop believing?
Man, I think the biggest myth that people believe about human trafficking is that it doesn't happen here, like it doesn't happen in our local community, that it has to happen overseas, that people are kidnapped and taken, from their homes. And what I've seen in the last 7 years of really doing this work is it's very domestic. And so it's right here in our community. We don't have, there's no discrimination. So every inch of our community is being impacted by human trafficking.
That's so true. And I know your organization is in Memphis, and I'm in Memphis, of course. And I just recently saw like there's a mall in Memphis that people are saying is a hot spot. There is certain neighborhoods in Memphis that are hot spots. So being aware of those things, how can people stay open about where those places are, what to avoid, et cetera?
I think the biggest thing is, to be aware of that human trafficking really happens to people that are vulnerable. So any of us can have vulnerabilities, so for us being African American women, for individuals living in poverty, being a immigrant or a foreign national, in this community. So any of that can make you vulnerable to trafficking. And so I think that's the biggest thing. So we do hear a lot of, again, myths about, well, the Wolf Chase Mall, like white vans are pulling up and they're taking folks. And in these last 7 years, our agency has not served anyone that's been thrown into the back of a white van. Sometimes just nationally and through social media, stuff just gets out. And that's what we think what's happening, but it's not really the reality.
And that's our generation too, right? Like when we were growing up, everybody was like, beware of the white van, beware of the white van. To this day, I'm beware of a white van. They got no roses, flowers on the side of it. Okay, have something on the side of your van.
Yeah, and I'll see them too, and I'm it's the trigger response. It's like, oh God, what's about to happen? Are they gonna jump out and like kidnap or this, that, or the other? But yeah, I think it's scare tactics,
Right.
and things that, people want us to, one, be walking in fear and not, with the power of information and education.
Okay.
And then two, they just want, like this false sense so that it can continue to kind of go under the radar.
Right.
And we don't really look at, like who could be doing these acts with people.
Yeah. So another thing I see, especially coming off the heels of the Diddy trial, we'll bleep Diddy out later, but a lot of people don't really understand. I was at my hairstylist throughout the trial, right? And they just was talking. They're gonna get mad at me for saying this, but they don't know I don't think people know what sex trafficking is and what it could look like different than what they think. And so getting some definitions down, human trafficking and sex trafficking, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so we're talking about exploiting, like another human for another individual's like financial gain. And so that can be by labor, which is labor trafficking, right? So we have a lot of foreign nationals who kind of come in and they then are labor trafficked because they don't have documents and they need to earn money and those kinds of things. And then you have other individuals who end up being exploited by sexual acts or sex. for money because there's a market for that, and other individuals, again, may take advantage and exploit them for those same things. And so I think the biggest thing, is to kind of what we say when we train in the community by force, fraud, or coercion,
Mhm.
right? And so I can force you physically, or I can do things that, can be emotional or mental force, right? Because you've seen me act in a way that was forcing you into doing certain behaviors because you're uncertain about what I'm going to do. And then, or it could be fraud, like you come here to the country and somebody or to the city, I'll say, because it could be somebody who's not from around here. And, somebody has told you, the story of just come to Memphis. There's so much opportunity here. I can get you a job. You can stay with me, all of these things. And then when you come in, it becomes, this situation of you owe me. How are you going to pay this debt off? Or, you can coerce someone. Maybe, they've convinced them to be out like sending you photos, or maybe they were stripping and you filmed it, and then you start kind of using that
Mhm.
information to say like, well, if you don't do it, I'm gonna share it with your whole high school,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
so think about a teenager and like what that goes through their mind if they think about what, like in one of my most vulnerable moments, you're gonna put that out, or you're gonna send that to the church, right? And so we have these individuals that go through these situations and like, yeah, I'm going to do what I have to do, stay under the radar.
And a lot of times too, like we think about labor trafficking versus sex trafficking, but they overlap, right? So there are times where you may initially be trafficked for labor, but also forced to get into sex trafficking as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think I would say 90 to 95% of the victims that we've had coming in, like for labor trafficking, it's been dual. And so they have experienced both. And so many times, yes, like they may be working 14 or so hours, a day, pretty much not getting any breaks and not getting really much compensation. And then, especially, I'll say for a lot of the women that we have seen, they during that work will also, have to do sex or any sex acts at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're talking a lot about school health and back to school and teens and kids too, because it happens to kids too. What signs should families or our educators be watching for in relation to, I guess, what makes Black youth vulnerable to trafficking?
Yeah. And I will say, because you asked me about the definition, so here in the state of Tennessee, we are a state that has legislation since back in 2011 that made sex trafficking of a minor not an offense that can be charged, that youth can be charged with at juvenile court. So up until that time, youth, if they were, like if there was a sting operation happening, then that youth could be charged with solicitation or prostitution as well. And so
Mhm.
our laws changed about 14 years ago, which is, something that we also work on with legislation as well. But in thinking about, the issue of human trafficking, I think, one, especially in this community of Memphis, right? And so we have a majority of African American people. We have a lot of crime for sure going on in our communities. And so what often happens is there's this stigma, that gets attached to youth or individuals that may be committing crimes in our community. And so a lot of times with our African American youth, if they are pulled over by police, they're sometimes almost always seen as the villain in the situation. They're seen as guilty. They're seen as the one who's initiated, certain things. And so when we start thinking about victimization, like we have a really big issue of our youth being seen, as victims in situations. And so that's one big one. I would say we also, like the numbers don't lie. 50% of our youth, 50% of our young people, 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 50% of our young And so we have a community where we have a disproportionate amount of African American youth who are living in poverty, right? And so that definitely makes them way more susceptible to things such as human trafficking, because traffickers are going to play on those vulnerabilities. So if you have youth who are teenagers, they're going to inner city schools, they want to have, the J's, they want to have the bundles, they want to have their nails done, they want to look the part that the rest of the kids are looking, or they could even be living in, kind of these public or subsidized housing situations where maybe, mom or dad is incarcerated, they're living with, a grandparent or aunt, and the bills aren't getting paid. And so, like if I can't eat at home, or, if I don't really have what I need, I'm unkempt, and I want all of these things, plus I want to keep my housing for my siblings, then they may be at this extra, vulnerability for trafficking.
I think that's really, really good. And so much came out of that, what you just said. So I think number one, coming from, I feel like I'm coming out of the crack generation, right? I raised in that era. And that's kind of what we saw with kids starting to sell drugs, right? They had these same kind of vulnerabilities and made them easy target, easy prey for drug dealers.
Yeah.
Number two, the victimization piece, because this kind of bridges me to my next question. Or kids are seen or aren't seeing Black kids specifically as victims in a lot of cases. There was a incident. Y'all, I keep talking about Memphis just because I'm from Memphis, right? Okay. But this for everybody. That there was a 23-year-old man, I think he was 23, but a grown man, let's say, that checked a kid out of school to have sex with her, promised money, did not pay, and she called the police. And the discourse on social media was, of course, it was like he's in the wrong and should be charged, et cetera, but really not criminalized, but really lay blame on the young girl, that it was her fault. She shouldn't have won. She should have known better. She's selling, blah, 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 blah. So couple questions. One, we need to stop that. How? And two, what role does the school play in that particular event, but in overall prevention, right? Can school nurses, school counselors, staff be a part of the solution?
Definitely. I think, the school personnel, other parents, teachers, even the custodian workers, right? And other youth can be a part of the solution, and when they have the education, right? I think we do a great job of wanting to blame, right? And so whether it's human trafficking or it's intimate partner violence, we have a bad habit, of saying, well, or even sexual assault, right? She asked for it.
Right.
Well, why was she wearing, this, or why was she doing X, Y, or Z, or why was she somewhere she didn't, she wasn't supposed to be. But at the end of the day, like, nobody wakes up, and wants to, and says, my dream is to sell my body and to sell sex. And so, again, there had to be some type of situation that happened, that made this individual vulnerable to being exploited, by someone. And so, even that situation, like when I hear about it, like the individual didn't pay, some that could have led to sexual assault, right? Because we have that happen all the time with individuals who are in the life of sex trafficking, that they'll come and then they invest, X amount of dollars, but then when they show up, they don't, show up with it, but I'm going to take it anyway. Kind of situation. And so, again, youth who are under the age of 18 here in the state of Tennessee, if those things, if there's been that exchange, it is sex trafficking, and so we have to stop labeling, our, back in our day, it was she's fast. Why is she, X, Y, and Z? And of course, if you're old school, you may still say fast or promiscuous, like whatever all the terms are. but we have to stop labeling our youth, in these negative terms, because again, when you talk about youth living in poverty or youth just in, our communities, like Memphis has been known as, number one or so in the country with violent crime, and so clearly we have some trauma, that's happening. We don't just have violent crime just out of nowhere, but why are our people hurting? And so sometimes we have to start asking ourselves, what's happening with these young people that they do end up in these situations. And so I think, that's one thing that we can start doing is to, kind of stop labeling and to start asking some questions like what happened,
Right.
like what happened to the youth, kind of to make this be the end game for them. I think our schools have a really big job, in prevention for sure. They can, community schools. I remember when we were growing up, right? We used to have so many educators that lived in our
Right.
communities, that lived by the school, that, like we're standing on the block. You had so many people that were concerned citizens, in the communities that were like, girl, where you been? I was gonna call your mama. I didn't see you turn the corner at such and such time, but we've gotten away from that. And so now things have kind of morphed, into what goes on in my house is my business. Don't worry about what's going on over here. I don't know you. Those kinds of things. And we have to get back to a place that we care about the kids that are in our communities and that are going to these community schools. I think the schools, on the SRO officers, need to be looking at who's pulling up to the school and at what times. Are kids, do you have cars that are coming up that, you haven't recognized before? Are people lingering, just trying to watch these youth and what's going on with them? Just really being active, and looking around, assessing, what's really going on, especially in communities where kids are walking, to and from schools. And if there are marked changes, like really, really marked changes, with our youth, like if they came to school and they had on their little, I guess, buddies. I don't know if we still call shoes that anymore. But if they had on buddies on Monday and then by Friday they're wearing J's and everything they have on is name brand, like what's really happening here? Like is it, a situation of did the family come into some income, or, is somebody dating someone that appears to be an adult, or could there be some situations going on that we can get curious about, right? So again, it's not to label and to blame, but it's, hey, you looking spiffy today, like let's talk about that. What has changed for you? And kind of being able to take that information and not necessarily to pounce and say, well, it's automatically sex trafficking, right?
Right.
But, to just be curious and let the youth know, like, you care. You're watching them. You want them to be safe. If you've seen them get in, somebody's car that, you don't recognize, have the conversation instead of, just making an accusation.
That be curious and ask questions because
Mhm.
it does come across, I think, to kids as care. It comes across as
Mhm.
parenting, the things that, like you said, community used to be, and we can be again. I don't want to keep saying, I don't want to say like that's what it
It's
was.
it's
It can
over.
be. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we didn't talk about this, but I think this is important too,
Mhm.
that a lot of times trafficking occurs with someone you know, are related to, or someone that you trust, right? So in this kind of digital age too, what do we need to know about online grooming or recruitment, the use of social media, like all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think one, we need to be super aware. There's so much grooming that happens online, so much of like activities around even sex work, if you will, just in general, even if you're facilitating your own, a lot of it happens online, and so predators are everywhere. And we as a society, we're so, used to putting devices in the hands of youth, like when they're 3 and 4 old, they know how to get online, they know how to get on these cell phones, these tablets, all of these things. And so we have to start viewing devices like, yes, what they're for. They can be games, they can be education, but there's also predators lurking. And so I think parents, educators, we all have to be diligent, about using those parent controls, using, firewalls and things that are going to protect our youth because they're young, they don't know, and so sometimes the speed of social media and the internet is moving so fast that sometimes we don't know, like
Right.
everything that they're being exposed to. And so I think parents, have a really big job, like we all do, of protecting youth from, predators and asking questions again. Who is this? Who are you talking to? What's going on? Like, are you just giving your 16-year-old a device and you never take it and look in, like what's going on? Like, give me this Snapchat. Let me look at it. Let me see who's in your messaging and DMs. Even when it comes to PlayStations, like we have had a situation where we were called and a young woman was missing for some time, but she didn't have her cell phone because she was on punishment, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the family was like, well, she doesn't have a way to communicate with anyone else. Well, her last communication that she had communicated with someone was through a PS, a PlayStation. And so again, it can be games, it can be, the cell phones, it can be computers and tablets, but, like we can't block any of that out.
You're right. Because I know my son was like, and I know we talk a lot about girls being trafficked, but boys can be trafficked
Hmm.
too. Because my
Absolutely.
son was like 9 and nobody tried to traffic him. But when he was like 9 or 10, he was on the PlayStation talking to these grown. I could tell the voices were grown. And I'm like, who
Right.
is that? He's on my friend. Mm-mm. Nah,
Right. We don't know
you a
them.
lie. Like we got to have some conversations about who, these
Absolutely.
people from Adam, and they really
Yeah.
too old to be playing with a kid on a freaking
Yeah.
PlayStation.
Yeah. And how just really going through, because I think even that, conversation, that opportunity of like, how can we really have this conversation without me, jumping the gun with, keeping them calm, but also like, how can, we teach our youth to do things that are protective? Because, adults, even if you aren't, like trying to traffic or exploit someone, we know how to get information from youth, like
Right.
we can position it in a way that they're going to tell us things,
Yeah.
and so especially, if that youth has low self-esteem and they're looking for acceptance, they're looking for love, they're looking for, all of these things, then, an adult that is looking to exploit them is
Mhm.
really going to be able to tap into, those things.
Yeah. And I think Pooh made that a lot worse because we were even more so isolated during the COVID era. And that's kind of their only method of building friendships, knowing how to talk to each other is through these devices.
Yeah.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about things to look for. So folks come in, they start off with not having a lot, and then all of a sudden they look like money. He got money now. But what are
Mhm.
some other common maybe warning signs or something that may turn off a light bulb in your head to say, let me pay attention?
Yeah, I think some warning signs or red flags may be tattoos, branding. Of course, here in the state of Tennessee, getting a tattoo under the age of 18 is illegal. So, right, parents. So, if you're seeing kids that have Tony on their neck, or like someone's name, like, is that a boyfriend, or like whose name is that? Because they could be, like representing, like as that they're property of someone. And so the branding for sure asking them about like, how do you get money? How do you pay for certain things? And if they are getting money, do they have, like, can they buy what they want? Or are they, do they work? Are they getting compensated, for their work? And do they have the ability to kind of go and move, as they please? Because that could be something with youth or adults, like, are you being paid, and do you have the ability to kind of come and go, as you please? Do they have ID, or is somebody else holding that? And just, kind of all of those things. Like when asking youth, like, do you have to pay for something, especially like runaway youth, right? So if a youth comes back from runaway, how were you able to sleep, at night? Did you have a roof on your head, or were you just under a bridge, every night? Like, tell me about that. And getting, again, getting super curious, kind of about those things, and trying to figure out, like, was somebody forcing them to pay for housing, or
Right.
forcing them to pay for food and that kind of thing. And food, too. Do you have the ability to eat as you please? Or, like, can you do that? Or does someone kind of dictate what you eat and how you eat, and those kinds of things? And so, I think it's so many things that just become kind of common that we miss them. They're so common, that we could be going so fast that we really could miss, those signs.
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
good information. So
Yeah.
I'm ready to flip the script a little
Mhm.
bit. We're going to just do a
Okay.
rapid fire round. First thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
Most misunderstood part about trafficking.
Most misunderstood that you have to be moved, so that it couldn't just happen on my block, but I have to be taken to another place other than Memphis.
Okay. Phrase traffickers use to manipulate trust.
I love you. Definitely is one. Like, if you loved me, you do whatever. I died.
What's one resource every survivor should have?
Oh, definitely support people. Like, if you're an adult, who is somebody you can get $5 from at any point? It's kind of something we say to them. Because that's somebody that you're tried and true, always gonna have your back. And then for you, if you got in a situation, of trouble, who would you call? And always having that contact information.
Your one wish for ending trafficking today.
Man, I honestly, I think just demand. I
Mhm.
think the trafficking doesn't happen without demand. And so I wish that we didn't live, in a place, and especially regarding our children and youth, that there was a demand
Right.
for sex with minors,
Mhm.
and so, like, if I can live to see that not be a thing,
Yeah.
like, yeah, that would be my world's dream.
Right. There's no supply without the demand. So thank you, thank you, thank you. This was a
Yeah.
great conversation. One thing before we go, if someone says to you, I really want to get involved, I think it's everybody's work, right? It's not just
Mhm.
these people, but I'm a little afraid about who to contact, when
Mhm.
to contact, or should I
Mhm.
contact? What would you say to them?
Yeah, so definitely Restore Core is a resource, and so if there's questions, if people want additional education, to talk to their youth groups or to talk to groups of people, definitely people can contact us. They can send us an email at info@restorecore.org. I know you'll put all of that in your blurb, but we have social media pages as well that we attempt to put out information and educate, the community. We also have a website, where people can go and kind of get some quick information about like what trafficking is, what it looks like. And so, like, if you find yourself in a situation, there's ways that you can truly access the internet to get true information, about what's going on. Or if you want more hands on, like if you have an affinity for working with youth or for people that are going through situations, we definitely take volunteers. who want to get in the work and kind of be able just to be an advocate for the issue. Definitely, we would love to have you join us in the fight for trafficking. I think, the biggest thing is like trust your gut. If something feels scary and like it's truly something criminal happening, trust your gut, call 911. Like don't waste time. If you see something, say something, and so, but don't risk your own safety by doing that. And so I think that's the biggest thing. Like don't approach situations like, oh, I'm finna get in here and I'm gonna take her from this situation. We are living in a day and time where there's a lot of uncertainty with how people will respond. And so, law enforcement, they truly are our partners in this work. And so, we have been for years on end working with law enforcement to help with this issue. And so allow them to help. They have guns, they have what they need, to be able to get the bad guys, if you will, guys or girls, to help recover victims from these types of situations. And don't put yourself out there like that. You don't have to.
Right. I think that's super important that people really need to hear. We don't want you to be in trouble too, but
No,
there are ways. So we'll have that
there are
information for
ways
you.
for sure.
Now, to everyone listening, here's your crown check for today. Trafficking doesn't always look like chains. Sometimes it looks like silence, survival, and someone you thought you could trust. We got to protect our communities, y'all. And that starts with believing our survivors, breaking down myths, and refusing to look away. If you know someone, or if you yourself has been or is being trafficked, we can have information to Restore Corps and also to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, where you can also seek help. This has been your health check-in with Crown Talks. If you love this, follow Cover Your Crown on social media, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Crown Talks wherever you get your podcast medicine. Consider yourselves Black, healthy, and crowned.
So good.